Iran's President Ebrahim Raisi says the United States should prove its will to lift sanctions in indirect talks to salvage a 2015 nuclear pact. Raisi was speaking during the first stay of his two-day official visit to Qatar. His trip to Doha comes amid progress in Vienna towards reviving the deal between Iran and world powers. Washington quit the 2015 nuclear agreement with Iran in 2018. The talks to revive the deal are closely watched by Gulf states concerned about Iran's missiles program.
The Emir, whose foreign minister recently held talks in Washington and in Tehran, says that his U.S. allied country is ready to do what it can to help bring an agreeable solution to all parties in Vienna. Earlier, Qatar and Iran signed bilateral agreements in the first visit by an Iranian president to Doha in 11 years. Raisi is scheduled to attend a gas exporters summit on Tuesday. Before heading to Qatar, the Iranian president expressed hope that his visit would boost ties with other Gulf Arab states. He stressed Iran's status as a main oil and gas producer, as well as founding member of the Gas Exporting Countries Forum. Iran's oil minister said on Monday that unilateral sanctions against members of the forum threaten global energy security and that Iran provides the best option for gas exports to East and West. Qatar has good relations with Iran, with which it shares a giant gas field. Tehran supported Doha after Saudi Arabia and its Arab allies imposed a boycott on Qatar in mid-2017 in a dispute over its ties with various terror groups and non-Arab Turkey and Iran. The Gulf row was resolved early last year, and Gulf powerhouse Saudi Arabia, which is locked in several proxy wars with Iran, including in Yemen, has been engaging directly with Tehran in a bid to contain tensions. Iran has faced gas shortages at home because of record high consumption, particularly for winter household heating, and has had to cut supplies to cement plants and other industries.
For more on this story, we're joined by Professor Nader Hashemi. He is a Middle Eastern Islamic politics expert, visiting scholar at the University of Cambridge. A very good evening once again, and thank you so much for speaking to us, Professor Hashemi. So, an important visit in the sense that it's the first visit, in 11 years, made by an Iranian president to Qatar. What has taken so long, and please speak a little bit more about the agreements that have been signed as well.
Well, the region has been in turmoil, as most of your listeners might know, for a very long time. And we're beginning to see somewhat of a thaw in tensions in the region between the two regional superpowers, Iran on the one side, Saudi Arabia on the other. And in this, regional landscape of deep tension, Qatar occupies a middle position. It has cordial relations with Iran. It has had very close relations with other members of the Persian Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Oman, etc. And so, the significance of this visit is that it sort of suggests that the regional de-escalation and tensions that have taken place really since the election of President Biden, and I think that's really the key turning point, that this de-escalation of tensions in the region is going to continue, and that Qatar can play an important facilitating role in reducing those tensions. The agreements that were signed that you referenced are mostly, I think largely symbolic. They have to do with air navigation, with common concerns over the production and the sale of natural gas. But I think the real importance of this visit is the political dimension of it, and it speaks to the prospect of less conflict in the region, not just because of the fact that Saudi Arabia and Iran are now in dialogue, but the region is on the cusp of perhaps a major breakthrough for peace and stability in the Middle East, and that's the revival of the Iran nuclear program, which your reporter was referring to. And in that sense, there's some cautious room for optimism that perhaps in the next few years, the region will be less conflict-ridden than it was over the last decade.
And obviously energy security being a big part of the politics in the region and of the individual countries, Iran being one of the founders of the Gas Exporting Countries Forum, for which it's going to a gas summit in Doha. So how much influence does it wield in terms of the outcome and perhaps a geopolitical undertones of some of these things that can come up if you're talking about the nuclear negotiations, for instance?
Right. Well, I mean, the key sort of point here to remember is that Iran has been under extreme crippling sanctions for the last 3 years, initiated by Donald Trump in 2018 and continued up until this moment by Joe Biden, because of the question of Iran's nuclear program. So now that we're on the cusp of perhaps a breakthrough in Vienna that would entail the lifting of those economic sanctions, that means Iran's huge petroleum resources, both oil and natural gas, will now come onto the global market. So that's a significant shift. And I think part of the discussion between Doha and Tehran today in the Middle East will be around sort of negotiating sort of the terms of what it means to have Iranian natural gas back on the global market. Both Iran and Qatar, share a common natural gas oil field. They have, joint concerns. They're both members of they're both members of OPEC. And so they have sort of shared economic interests to make sure that the dissemination and the sale of petroleum products, whether it's oil or natural gas, takes place within the framework of existing agreements so that no country is sort of left out. So that's, I think, part of the discussion here. And all of this really hinges on the talks in Vienna, but there's a general sense that those talks are inevitably going to produce a success in the next few days, thus necessitating the two major natural gas producing Middle East countries to sort of make sure that they're all reading from the same playbook.
I guess I'm also just trying to understand the regional politics. Some of the Gulf countries have been very vocal about their concerns around Iran increasing its nuclear power. President Raisi is due to meet with Qatar's Emir, whose foreign minister has held talks with Washington. And there's the relationship which you spoke about earlier on about Tehran and Doha. Tehran supporting Doha in its conflict with Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries. So is Doha going to play mediator, or is there going to be some quid pro quo in some of the demands that are made in salvaging the nuclear pact?
Well, I think all of that is in play. Primarily Doha, under the current leadership of the Emir of Qatar, has played the role of a mediator, not just regionally between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but also internationally between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran. Remember that there are no diplomatic relations between Iran and the United States. Qatar is very close with the United States. Its value has increased. What I mean is that the value of Qatar as a regional ally has increased in recent months for the United States because of the role that it has played in allowing the United States to exit from Afghanistan. I suspect that the Emir of Qatar is passing messages between Iran and the United States with respect to the nuclear conflict and the nuclear program that is being discussed right now in Vienna. But regionally, of course, there have been deep tensions within the Gulf Cooperation Council states, within those 6 Arab states. Under President Donald Trump, there was an attempt to actually topple the existing government in Doha by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, with support from Donald Trump's son-in-law and other sort of regional players. Thankfully, that did not happen, and now there has been a warming of relations, basically a patching up of differences within the Gulf Cooperation Council. Heads of states that were previously at war with each other within the Persian Gulf have now sort of at least temporarily, put aside their differences. And what remains outstanding is Iran's sort of relationship with Saudi Arabia, its main regional rival. So now that Qatar is has made up, has sort of reconciled with Saudi Arabia, now it can play this role as a mediator between the two regional sort of hegemons, if you will, Iran on the one side, Saudi Arabia on the other. I do want to emphasize, however, that all of this talk about de-escalation and warming of relations, I think is very superficial. I think if in 3 years from now, Donald Trump comes back into office in the United States, and there's a very good likelihood that that might happen, we will be back to the tensions and the conflict that we saw in 2016 when Donald Trump entered the White House. So I think it's important that we don't read too much into this this sort of warming of relations, the détente, if you will, that seems to be underway between Iran and Saudi Arabia, facilitated by Qatar as a mediator. Those are all obviously positive developments, but I don't think they significantly suggest that the fundamental underlying issues that have produced conflict between Saudi Arabia on the one hand and Iran on the other have been resolved in any way. I think there's just a sense of, look, we've exhausted ourselves. Let's try and at least cordially learn to coexist and see what happens in the next coming years.
But what regional proxies would benefit from this posturing then?
Well, the regional proxies won't benefit because there's an assumption that if there's a de-escalation of tensions, that implies that the regional proxies that Iran supports and Saudi Arabia supports would have to be reined in, because this is one of the big grievances that that exists between these two regional hegemons. The big issue right now, as most of your listeners know, or at least should know, is the war in Yemen. Saudi Arabia and Iran are on different sides of that war. That's the big sticking point in terms of whether there can be some sort of, I don't think there can ever be, I think, a resumption of diplomatic relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia unless and until the war in Yemen is resolved in some sort of, just and meaningful way. Unfortunately, the Biden administration, despite sort of claiming that it wanted to support a just resolution of the conflict in Yemen, a conflict, by the way, that UN says is the worst humanitarian crisis on the planet, the Biden administration has effectively pursued the same policy as the Trump administration, and that is backing Saudi Arabia in its war aims in Yemen. So I don't see that conflict, unfortunately, resolving itself anytime soon, which is why I'm very skeptical about these diplomatic moves that are taking place. I think they're very superficial, and I think they're not going to last for a very long time because we're fundamentally dealing with authoritarian regimes that are worried about, maintaining their own power and projecting their own power. They're not seriously interested in human rights, in democracy, and good governance. So that's why I think we have to be very careful not to sort of over-exaggerate this warming of relations that we're seeing from some of the major players in the Middle East.